Hello, my name is Tom Harris. I'm the director of the University Center for Economic Development at the University of Nevada, Reno. This is a podcast that's part of a Nevada Economic Development Conference that happened here on September 21st and 22nd. And one of the keynote speakers for lunch is Dr. Sam Cordes, who is sitting to my left. And Sam is an emeritus professor at Purdue University. I've known Sam for many years. He's been in the department head of agriculture economics at University of Nebraska and at the University of Wyoming, has done a lot of work in rural economic development and is aware of rural economic challenges and also in the West, the unique things. In Sam's luncheon address, he had 9 nuggets or keys for future success. We won't cover all of those. We're only going to cover about 4 or 5. And so, Sam, I was going to let you address one of the first nuggets, which will be one of the first slides you'll see, is that we have to think in terms of assets and not liabilities. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Sure. Well, first let me say it's a pleasure to be here on campus and spend time with you again, Tom. But there's always typically a tendency to start looking at the problems and the issues, and without being Pollyanna-ish, it's really important to look at the assets that a community or a region has. And this whole idea was pioneered in actually urban Chicago when a couple of people at Northwestern University started working in the impoverished areas of Chicago, and they found, as on the surface, it looked like it was really a bad situation, but when they started working within the community, they found that there's lots of assets. The people had hidden skills and talents. The local churches, the schools, and so on were provided a convening place for people to discuss the issues and so on. And so moving from the idea that we should focus just on our deficiencies and always look to the outside to some savior to take care of things, we've shifted our thinking a lot more these days to let's identify and mobilize our assets, build internally from our own strengths, and go from there. And oftentimes those assets need to be, they need to be identified, but then they need to be mobilized.
And many of the rural areas often too, they really think of their liabilities, but they have many assets.
Oh, absolutely. It's the assets of everything from natural assets in terms of the landscape to the people, to the inventive spirit of people in rural areas. So it's better to think about the glass being half full instead of half empty. But if you take the deficiency approach and focus only on your liabilities, it gets pretty depressing, and you don't go very far.
One of his other nuggets, as Sam talks about, is spending versus investments. What do you mean by that?
Well, in business, of course, it's well known that businesses have to invest to become more productive, more efficient, and so on. And when we think of communities and regions, we also need to invest. But much of that gets into the public sector, and there's a huge amount of lack of understanding between the difference between public investment and public spending. When we spend, in the case of federal dollars, on Social Security, on Medicare, on farm program payments, and so on, there's good reasons to do that, very good reasons to do that in terms of societal ethics and norms and so on. But that's not investment. It's not going to make our economy, our communities, any more productive. Investment, on the other hand, we're looking at our schools, we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at transportation. In rural areas, which you mentioned, information technology, having world-class IT is absolutely essential these days, in the same way that interstate highways and so on have been essential. So people get very concerned about public expenditures, and that's fine, that's fair enough. But when they get concerned, they need to separate out what is spending from what is investment and realize that the investment actually increases the capacity and the productivity of our economy in areas of it that I've mentioned: infrastructure, IT, education, and so on.
I agree. I mean, people have talked about that our slow economy, GDP, is that maybe our lack of productivity. And even in rural areas, the more productive we have of our people, the better our economies will be.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to invest in order to improve our productivity.
The other nugget Sam brought up, and I think is very apropos in the state of Nevada, we have many areas here in western Nevada, especially Douglas County and South Lake Tahoe, where people have lots of money, one of the highest per capita income. And one of the areas he talks about is community philanthropy. Could you expand on that?
Well, yes. This is something that I don't think people realize, and we're now at a point with baby boomers like myself. There's going to be huge transfers of wealth. And a study was done here in Nevada a few years back that indicated that over a 50-year period, there would be $383 billion of wealth transferred from one generation to the next. This represents, we know that most of that is going to go to families and charitable causes. But in some states, they've been successful in getting those folks that have wealth that they're going to be transferring to their heirs and charitable causes to at least consider taking a few percentage points and dedicating it to a community foundation for the betterment of the community or the region. And in the case of Nevada, if you were to take just a measly 5% of that $383 billion, if I did my math right, you'd end up with about $20 billion, an endowment of about $20 billion. Now, what's $20 billion? Well, the Ford Foundation, the nation's second largest, has an endowment of a little over $10 billion. So it would be like having two Ford Foundations in Nevada with those resources dedicated to regional and community improvement and so on. If those wealthy folks that you're talking about would consider just a small proportion of that being rolled into a community philanthropic foundation.
Well, I understand when you were at Nebraska, you were pretty successful in developing a rural Nebraska foundation.
Yeah. The bigger cities like Reno and Las Vegas, I'm sure they have their own foundations and they have the staff and the management capacity and all. But smaller communities where there's a lot of wealth too don't have the resources to establish a community foundation in some small town, maybe like Wells or something like that. I don't know, maybe Wells does have one. But so what we did at Nebraska, which also has a lot of small communities, we created an umbrella foundation, and then each community sort of has its own savings account within that, and so that each community didn't have to invest in the legal and the tax and everything like that, which would have been prohibitive, board of directors and all that. But it's the community's money, it's their savings account, but the legal and accounting infrastructure is taken care of at the state level. And there are currently about almost 300 communities in Nebraska that have a savings account in this Nebraska Community Foundation. And it's really adding up to some big bucks. And those communities can go in there and tap that endowment for various purposes.
The next nugget that Sam discussed was the regional mindset. This is looking just not within your own borders. Economy, dollars travel between states and counties. But when we talk about economic development where we work, we need to sometimes think of a regional mindset. So, Sam, what was your on that issue?
Well, some of your good work, Tom, on commuting patterns makes it very clear that the economy doesn't begin and end at the city limits or the county boundaries or whatever. I mean, people, the ordinary person, doesn't pay any attention to that. They live one place, they work another place, they might shop another place, they might do recreation somewhere else. But yet we have these geopolitical boundaries called city limits, county boundaries, and so on. And in all due respect, the politicians that are responsible for that jurisdiction can become pretty provincial. And we know that the economy will be better off in many, many cases if we can forget about those artificial boundaries, which people travel over every day, many, many times, and think more about the regional assets and how they can be linked and leveraged together to support a more robust regional economy. But this gets into issues of turf. It's hard, but there have been some examples of some very important and impressive regional examples. The one right here, was it Nevada Western
Nevada Development District, which is EDA Development District.
Is a good example of, and you can achieve a lot if you're willing to put down some of your geographically based self-interest. If you're an elected official, if you're willing to collaborate and all see that all boats rise together.
And we're talking sometimes fiscal, FISCAL, and that's something about how we improve that.
Yeah.
And the last one we'd like to do on the nuggets is Sam addressed entrepreneurship and innovation. These are big topics. Sam, could you extrapolate a little bit more?
Well, just backing up,
Sure.
50 years or whatever, there was a time when the most common economic development strategy was industrial recruitment. Mm-hmm. Try to attract a factory or a manufacturing plant or whatever it was to your state, your region, your community, or whatever. That made a lot of sense in those times because the old industrial economy was going full steam. There were a lot of plant expansions and all those kinds of things, and perhaps most importantly, there wasn't global competition from low-cost competitors, namely other countries. So most people, almost everyone, agrees that the real comparative advantage of our economy today, and the economic development strategy that follows from it, is basically around entrepreneurship, innovation, and the knowledge economy, and the idea that we need to grow and create new businesses instead of trying to steal businesses from some other community or some other state or whatever is really a much more important way to go. And the kinds of businesses that seem to be especially important, or they're sometimes called gazelles. They're sometimes called second stage companies. These are companies that have gone beyond the startup, but they're still small, relatively small, maybe 5 to 10 employees. And they're poised, many of them, for future growth. And there are ways in which resources can be provided to those companies to help them grow and expand. And in the process of doing that, the job creation that gets associated with that is really a lot larger. We always think of the big job creation associated with these monstrosities. If you look at the data, it's really these second stage companies as they grow. And so entrepreneurship is very important. It doesn't always have to be in an urban area. I cited a couple of things in my talk about innovative businesses in small communities. I talked about a manufacturing plant in Brookings, South Dakota, where I did my undergraduate degree. It's called Daktronics. It's the world, by far, the largest manufacturer of electronic scoreboards for all sporting events and other things, concerts. And it was because there was a couple of faculty members at South Dakota State University, engineers, that started it. So these businesses can happen anywhere.
And what we say is not excluding rural areas. Rural can participate in this new economy as well as urban areas.
Yes.
That's the end of this podcast. I want to thank Sam for doing the lunch and speaking. Next year's economic development will be in Las Vegas. I hope you can attend. When we have this podcast, we'll also have room for comments. If you want to have some comments, be sure to share them. You can discuss this later, and we'll share Sam's overheads with you. And again, Sam, thank you, and always enjoyed seeing you.
It's always nice to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.